I'm really thrilled to have a great panel here to join us in this discussion. Russell Chung is the Chief Procurement Officer for the University of California, Berkeley. William Theisen is the Chief Executive of EcoAct North America. And Richard Waugh is Vice President for Corporate Development at Zycus Lythouse. So thank you all so much for being here. Scope 3 emissions for some companies account for 80 to 90% of total emissions, and I think that speaks to the importance of addressing this. Many business leaders have now realized that the key to this is collaborating with their suppliers, but these actors are so disparate and dispersed that it is also important to know how to manage the costs involved. And those are some of the themes that we will be discussing right now. I think I will jump right in as people are still streaming in. William, I'll actually start with you. EcoAct is a climate consultancy, and so you advise on engaging with suppliers in that capacity. Tell us some of the strategies that you've seen have worked, some of the initiatives that have worked, but also some of the challenges that those strategies are meant to address.
Yeah, so, I mean, we have regulation coming out. We have CSRD, we have science-based targets. The supply chain is definitely being included into the equation. And what we really see ourselves as a consultancy is always as an enabler for change and to kind of keep going and speeding ahead to achieve our net zero targets. So a lot was kind of discussed earlier today with Walmart, and she gave a really good landscape of what was being done and what we've seen actually be successful. But just kind of give a little bit more granularity on it. So where we've seen success in working with our clients is, of course, you can't skip over the calculation of Scope 3. You do actually have to calculate your Scope 3, whether it's estimating through spend-based emissions, really trying to understand where the hot spots are. And then moving on to kind of supplier engagement, it really is trying to understand where to kind of focus your energy. So, companies have thousands and thousands of suppliers sometimes, but those suppliers may not be the ones, there may be a majority of the suppliers that are actually not contributing to the majority of your Scope 3 emissions. So where we have seen where companies kind of go in terms of assessing their supply chain and to assess category 1, which is purchased goods and services, is to really understand what emissions are being making up most of their Scope 3, and then really looking at their suppliers on their maturity level. So we frequently work with clients on trying to make a grading system in terms of looking at their overall supply chain. Are they not doing anything? Have they assessed their emissions? Have they set reduction targets? Have they actually produced a roadmap? And already that gives a good indication of what suppliers they can actually kind of engage with first, or where there are laggards. And then there's also the question of influence, right? There's a lot of companies that want to engage with their supply chain, but they may actually be contributing to only a small percentage of their actual spend or the revenues for the supplier. So then there's a question of okay, how much can we influence? And then it starts moving into strategy, really trying to understand how do we enable these companies to start reporting. So then it's looking at, how do, and Walmart, again, covered some of their initiatives, but there's a lot more that we've seen kind of engage on, and it's evolving quite quickly. To look at your supply chain, and maybe there's capacity building seminars or training that you're doing to kind of get your suppliers on board. What are GHG emissions? How do you set science-based targets? And then there's also initiatives like kind of competitions or funding initiatives that we've seen more of, and to try to incentivize the suppliers to actually either assess their emissions, take those reduction actions, or actually do science-based targets. And then it's also looking at how they can communicate the information to the company itself. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky because there's a lot of questionnaires going out to companies that are in the supply chain right now. And they're feeling overwhelmed. Every questionnaire is different. And so they're just getting bombarded by, they may be working with 100 different companies buying their products. And so where we have seen is there's been continued alignment on how companies are actually getting that information. So they could be relying on CDP, supply chain programs where like companies are actually reporting, getting all the questions answered in terms of their emissions, science, their targets, et cetera. And then they can open up that door to any company that's buying their products or services. Or they're utilizing technology, and we'll talk a little bit about that later with the panelists, is technology is really playing a key role in creating like platforms for companies to enter their information, get that information assessed, so their GHG emissions, set their reduction targets, even maybe get some recommendations on roadmaps, and AI is playing a real part in kind of determining those roadmaps and making it easier for smaller companies to actually engage with the buyer so that they can get the information that they want. But lastly, I mean, the thing that I'm really excited about is coalitions. So coalitions we're seeing more and more of where companies are getting together and like they may be in the semiconductor industry, they may be in the pharmaceutical industry, getting together and trying to engage their joint supply chains and trying to enable them as an industry to kind of start getting used to reporting reduction roadmaps and actually trying to reduce our emissions at the source, so then the scope 3 in turn is reduced. So there's a lot going on in the space and a lot of innovation going in the space, but there's still a long way to go because even though the companies like Walmart are very far on the journey, some companies are still just starting to assess their scope 3 and identify which companies are the most material emissions.
Absolutely. Russell, you also use a tracking and a scoring mechanism to understand what's happening among your suppliers for UC Berkeley. Tell us a little bit about that and how it's helped you engage with suppliers.
Sure. First of all, I'm the Chief Procurement Officer for Berkeley. I also chair the sustainable procurement activities for our 10 campuses for the UC, which of course, some big campuses, including, Berkeley, UCLA, UC San Diego. That's all the 10 campuses, and the medical center has their own sustainable procurement working group. So back in actually so I have a regular job, but I have to do this job also. So in late 2021, it was really November 2021, we just decided, hey, we're always subscribing to EcoVadis, this platform. Why don't we just tell our suppliers to give us their assessments? And so I sent out a letter with our Office of the President to our supply base, and currently we have about $4.7 billion of supply base in assessments. We have 340 suppliers using EcoVadis that we're getting their EcoVadis assessments. And it was really the desire to have a quantifiable score versus someone just, hey, here's their subjective, here's how we're going to grade this supplier subjectively. So finding a platform, and we have Zycus Lythouse here, but I wouldn't create your own. Gosh, go find software that's already available, and then don't guess, right? You actually use something, a qualified, quantifiable scorecard that you can then grade your supply base in. And so we categorize ours into we called it Wave 1. Was our top. We basically took a slice of our suppliers over $1 million, and then who we thought were significant contributors to greenhouse gases, and then we said, okay, that's top 200. Let's go in and tell them we need them to get onto EcoVadis. And it could have been any platform, but we had already been subscribing to that. And again, this was really easy because I had a day job, and I just put the message out there, and the suppliers surprisingly were willing to engage. And it's a great marketing tool. if you have a good EcoVadis score, right? And they wanted to be associated with the University of California and UC Berkeley, so they pretty willingly did the assessments and provided those scores. So it was really a very easy process for us, and now we're on our wave 2, where we're bringing in smaller suppliers, and that's more not so much for the assessment, but because we don't have staff that trains them on sustainability, right? They can go onto the platform and learn about sustainability. So we don't care what their score is. Well, we do, but if they don't have a program in a small supplier that's 25 or whatever, right? They can learn about sustainability through the EcoVadis platform, which can be as low as, I think for a small supplier, it's as low as $800.
So Zycus Lythouse also has offerings in this area around green supplier engagement and tools for that. Tell us a little bit about what your tools do and how it helps with engagement.
Yeah, happy to. And I don't think you don't have to have billions of dollars in supply chain spend like the UC system does. I think for most organizations, if you had 100 million or more in spend, you're dealing with thousands of suppliers, perhaps on a global basis. So it really does cry out for a technology solution rather than trying to do this through brute force. And once a year, we're going to gear up and get our reports in line. And guess what? You're going to have to start over again that cycle because it's never going to go away. It's not a one-time event. This is something you're going to have to do the reporting on an ongoing basis. So the technology piece comes into play. And I also appreciate William with the advisory. I think is oftentimes part of that strategy is going to be you need to have a scalable solution for this from a technology standpoint. So what we've done, Lythouse is a relatively newer product, launched last year, but the parent company, Zycus, has been 25 years in sourcing and procurement. So through that time, the parent company built, a significant global network of suppliers, 1 million or more, and trillions of dollars in transactions, and really developed a technology that leverages AI to identify exactly what's being purchased, which is the critical link that we see for Scope 3, which is to be able to get to an item level, and it's not always structured data, it's often unstructured data, this sort of fuzzy terminology and an item description that AI can sift through in different languages and sort of determine, okay, this is really what this was. And, it takes a holistic approach too. EcoVadis was mentioned, that's great for the rating data, and we pull in that kind of data. But you also need to be able to capture your spend transactions, as I say, and identify what was being bought. And we're doing that with, applying AI to more accurately categorize and classify those spend transactions, identify exactly what it was that was being purchased. And once we can do that, we can say, well, which of 60,000 different emission factors apply to this widget, right? And you think about the permutations there. That's the kind of stuff that human beings shouldn't be trying to do with spreadsheets or brute force, or it's kind of boggles the mind, or would make you want to bang your head against a wall after a while. But it really applying tools like AI to make that data more accurate and reporting much easier is really the way we see this going.
William, tell us a little bit about how the regulatory landscape has been changing and how that has influenced the way that companies engage with their suppliers.
Yeah, we have CSRD, which is definitely coming into play. It's putting a lot more pressure on companies to actually, now report on their Scope 3. But as more companies are forced to report on Scope 3, then it's more being accountable for Scope 3. So, but in a lot of sense, that actually creates a lot more data out there. And so I think that's where a lot of these platforms, actually EcoAct is part of a wider group called Schneider Electric. And within Schneider Electric, I don't know, for some reason we cornered the market on Z starting platforms. Also has a supplier chain engagement platform called Zycus Activate, where it's like it can pull in data and then trying to help assess forecast emissions for companies and get them more accurate so that they are more actionable. Because if we're only using spend-based data, the only way to decrease your emissions is actually to decrease your spend on a certain item. So I see like these kind of supply chain platforms as really interesting, where they're kind of companies are being forced to report on Scope 3. They're enabling small and medium enterprises to actually report their emissions to the companies, because it's not going to get easier. It's just going to get more and more hard, and there's going to be, and companies who are the buyers are just going to be want to see more precise emissions. And so the more data that can go into these platforms, the more actionable those data points can be and those hotspots can be for actual reductions, where these small, medium enterprises can actually take action, is going to be really important as more data, more reporting, and then investors have more information to judge on whether you're actually achieving those Scope 3 reduction targets.
If I could interject, one of the reasons why we chose EcoVadis is, while it isn't very specific to Scope 3 or greenhouse gas emissions, though our brand is very important. Your brand is very important. And we know your third-party relationships are really important. So understanding who you're doing business with, you need to go and find a measurable source to go and understand the relationship that you have. And this is what I tell my staff. We have too many suppliers, and I just tell, you're not going to let everyone in your house. So you have to be selective on who you let into your house. Then actually have a quantifiable tool related to sustainability, but also business ethics and such, right? On who's going to represent your brand in the supply base.
I just want to take a moment to remind the audience that if you have any questions for the panelists, you can do that through the Slido app, and I will make sure to raise them for the panel. Richard, tell us a little bit about some of the challenges that you face in terms of engaging with suppliers and what you do and face.
Yeah, and I think it may have been alluded to already to some extent, but there is some supplier fatigue or portal fatigue, right? Here's another data request, another survey tool, and those kinds of things. And we're not immune to that necessarily, but I talked a lot about AI, and I think it's really what's going to lead the evolution and revolution in this area as we go forward. And one of the things that AI can do is help relieve the burden from those suppliers. So what I mean by that is, they're being asked to report for all these N number of customers across Y number of reporting formats, but there's all kinds of overlap, right? But it's formatted a little bit differently and those kinds of things. So one of the things that AI allows them to do is to a large extent provide that data once and syndicate it across all those different customers by being able to parse through that data and make it fit multiple different formats. Being able to, AI can go through huge volumes of data and decide this belongs here and, parse this data in this way. So I think that's key. And, the other thing is meeting suppliers where they live, making it easy for them. So no fees imposed on the suppliers, just browser access. So, make it a little bit easier. And I think even provide a little bit of an upside to suppliers. And one of the things, and I know, Russell, you're a CPO, and I know you probably hear from a lot of suppliers all the time, you're just beating me down on price. All you care about is that. And suppliers often say, I need a way to differentiate, to my customer. Right. This is a great new way for suppliers to be able to differentiate, to say, I'm on board with your goals. You've set these targets and you want to be, net zero by X date or whatever. And here's what I'm doing to help you achieve that. And all of a sudden, I have the ability to sort of differentiate myself above and beyond simple cost, quality delivery.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think what we're also seeing as a huge challenge, and this doesn't just go for suppliers, this just goes for companies as well. You set your ambition, right? Like, even if you get your supply chain up to the point of where they've assessed their emissions, they set their targets, they have the roadmap, then actually having them pay for the reductions is a huge challenge. And that's kind of going back to coalitions. I think that's really been a huge step in the right direction. And where we have seen it over at EcoAct and wider Schneider Electric is actually because we're working a lot in renewable energy. So having coalitions of small and medium enterprises come together, invest in a PPA or a VPA, and get those reductions through renewable energy is one way that coalitions can work. There also can be coalitions in terms of getting certain sectors that have, like I mentioned, semiconductors. So we have a program called Catalyze. We have another one for pharmaceuticals called Energize, right? Like it's getting the supply chain together and finding out the common issues and enabling, again, for those reductions to actually happen. So it's great to have the roadmap, but how do you help them pay for and make it easy for them to actually reduce at the source? Because they may reap the benefits. There is an ROI on this, but and there's an ROI for the company, but they may not be as short term that they can handle that cost in the immediate sense.
Speaking to the coalitions, there's also a coalitions on the buying side, where you can leverage your activities with your supply base. So we're lucky within the UC, so all our 10 campuses, we share our data, but there's Sustainable Procurement Leadership Council where they have, I'm on the phone with them and they have, the oil companies on the line saying, okay, we got to go put it in the sustainable procurement practice.
Airlines.
How do we, and so they have community of practices in there. And that's it, finding a community of practice for the industry and then finding a community of practice within your industry also, because there's a good chance you're sharing the same supply base.
Yeah, I mean, in airlines, they're creating a supply chain, right? They don't have access to enough sustainable aviation fuel. So these coalitions are actually engaging with a supply chain that cannot actually produce yet, right? Like, so, the Sustainable Aviation Buyers Alliance is a good example, like as an intermediary to kind of grow the market for sustainable aviation fuel. I think coalitions are really going to be the future. I also think technology is going to be a huge play in this because when I think of AI, so even I get a little freaked out about like, oh, can they do my job? But actually, I think AI in this space can really play a really strong role in making action plans and recommendations to small, medium company enterprises or within supply chain, within their specific context to get them started on a path to actual reductions.
I want to look forward and sort of what your long-term plans are. Maybe, Richard, you could tell us what are some of your longer-term plans for engaging with suppliers to drive sustainability into the future?
Yeah, as I said, first of all is lowering the barriers to entry for suppliers, and as we think about the networking effect, because we're in the business of, the Lythouse includes a green supplier network. Part of the networking effect is, once we engage a supplier to their buying customer for purposes of reporting up, that supplier has to do the same things themselves, right? So turning them into, that's, I think it's a virtuous cycle because, of course, it increases revenue for us, but it means that more and more participants across the supply chain are being able to look at, and accurately report, their carbon footprints and decarbonization efforts and those kinds of initiatives. So I think it's about bringing more folks into the fold. I talk a lot about AI, I'll keep on doing it, but it's a machine learning tool as well. And one of the things that's really exciting about that is the more data it sees, it gets progressively smarter and more accurate. So as time goes by, I think one of the issues we're all dealing with today is in terms of reporting, carbon reporting and emissions and those kinds of things, how accurate is the underlying data? Well, the data is going to continue to get better, as more participants engage with the process. So I think it's continued growth. It's turning those and William, I think you referred to it. You know, in most technology markets, the first adopters are larger enterprises for whom the challenges are most acute. So it's the folks like the UC system that have billions of dollars in spend. But it's going to cascade downward, you know, and that's good for everyone because that means that those mid and small businesses for whom this is too complex or it may seem like the technology is out of reach, the costs come down, you know, the barriers to entry in terms of accessibility come down. So it's really going to be enabling all the tiers of the supply chain to participate.
Russell, what about in the UC system? Where are you seeing this going? What challenges do you think are going to come up?
Well, I think ours is pretty simple. So, right, you can do, so from a buying perspective, you can do a baseline scope 3 on a high level, right? But it's spend based and it's not going to give you much detail. So rather than go down that route, right, and this isn't an EcoVadis commercial, because every day I ask myself, is EcoVadis the right tool? Are we spending too much? Right? Whatever. Are there better tools out there? But so it's having that baseline, but that baseline actually doesn't help us. So now what we're going in is we understand what our spend is, and then we're going to take the very specific categories. Then we're going to look at our spend data, and we're going to say, oh wait, we buy a lot of this, and there's a lot of greenhouse gas emissions on this. Okay, let's use that as the baseline specific for these categories, right? So we'll actually go down into the product level and say, okay, I want to know what the greenhouse gas emissions are on this product, and this is the improvement that we will plan. So it's really pretty easy. It's just you got to just go do the work, but then we'll let software do it. I don't want people running spreadsheets doing this stuff, right? So it is pretty, you know, do your scope 3, whatever, do the high level spend, which is really inexpensive but not very accurate, and so the blunt, and then go in and look at your spend data and say, okay, let's actually look at the greenhouse gas emissions, and then let a company or let software go in and calculate your baseline and then the improvements that come through.
William, what do you have your eye on right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of in line with what everybody said so far, but I think I'm excited about. People get a little bit worried about reporting, right? Like in that especially when it comes to scope 3, and I agree, right? Like scope 3, it's a journey, right? Like, I mean, and where EcoAct likes to play actually is scope 3, because that's really where the innovation comes. Like, we're kind of making assumptions, we're in line with best practice, but kind of you can dig into the data as far as you can go and really try to get it quite precise. And there's some answers that we just don't have, like streaming emissions are are hard to calculate. But I think what I'm really excited about in the future is just with reporting and scope 3 being part of the equation, the amount of data that will be available will actually make this problem a lot easier. And that will be in a combination of technology, that will be in a combination of just suppliers actually just reporting data directly to companies, but actually supplying companies actually to be more specific about where their emissions sit within their own supply chains. So it just kind of amplifies the effect, right? Like everybody kind of plays a part, and then everybody has a more precise understanding of their emissions, and therefore can take action a lot easier. Because again, we go back to spend-based. I mean, spend-based is great, but I mean, like, you need it as accurate as possible to enable reductions. Yeah, and then again, coalitions. I'm just excited about coalitions. The more that we can kind of do cross collaborations, frenemies getting together in competitive spaces to kind of share knowledge, I see that as a real change in the last 5-10 years. And I see that really kind of moving forward exponentially in the future because we're all in this together, and we just got to make sure that we're taking action as quick as possible.
I'm going to take one question from the audience, and I'll ask you all just to be very brief. The question is about incentives, carrots versus sticks, versus punishing your suppliers when they don't comply. And I'll just ask each of you very quickly to say where you see the balance between the carrots versus the sticks.
I'll answer that first because we ask this every day. And we don't use the stick approach, but we do now, if it's a critical RFP, then we're saying we need to see a certified sustainability score, because we take our 100% percentage and we actually now, the UC, puts a percentage on it as high as 25% for sustainability, right? So we got to see something that is quantifiable. And there are some discussions that say then to be awarded, you need to be above this level, or we need to see your action plans to get there. And that would be that's still the carrot, because you're going to get awarded the contract.
Very quickly, William.
I think carrots are great, and I think those should. I like supplier awards. I like actually where we've seen success is when there's the kind of a grant program that suppliers can access to enable them to address their emissions or set targets. But I think that sticks do play a part. But it can't be the stick coming out right at one fell swoop. I think it's a gradual stick to make sure that your supply chain is on the journey. They understand that this is important and that they need to be evolving at a regular pace, that eventually the stick will take a swing and may exclude you from their supply chains. But I think you have to be careful about that. You definitely want to make sure that you're kind of gradually warming them up to understand how important these climate actions are.
Final word, Richard.
Yeah, carrots. And I think there's an opportunity for procurement and supply chain to sort of vote with their checkbooks,
Yep.
so to speak. So, I mentioned Zycus. Lythouse is the ESG reporting platform, but I'll relate it back to Zycus, the parent that has sourcing and procurement tools. And carrots to suppliers can include, when those sourcing and procurement tools, when you're doing an RFP and creating a short list that right visible to that category manager, that buyer, in creating the RFP is which of my supply base is improving their overall ranking and rating as regards to the emissions and so on. And even more of a moment of truth when an end user in an e-procurement tool creates a requisition, right? So you may have multiple different suppliers capable of providing one item. How do I, as the requisitioner, distinguish between them and pick one? Well, one's flagged as a green product.
That's right.
Right, from a supplier. So right at the top of the search results, really driving that behavior can be a real carrot to those suppliers, because it means delivering more business to them.
Yep. And our e-procurement tool will flag both price and green products first. That's what you're going to see first.
Well, I think we have a vote in favor of carrots. I want to thank you all so much for joining us and for talking through these issues.